Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Remy had grown up with his single mother, Ellen, in a trailer on the outskirts of Harrow. She was a quiet woman, exhausted from years of pulling extra shifts at the restaurant, her eyes always casting a shadow of something unspoken. She had raised him alone, never mentioning his father, and only providing hazy answers when Remy asked her about his origins. "You're mine, Remy," she'd say, her voice firm yet brittle, like glass poised to fracture. "That's all you need to know." By the time he was 12, he'd stopped asking and accepted quiet as a part of their relationship. Ellen died 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, leaving Remy with more questions than memories. This letter felt like a ghost reaching out from her past, demanding answers she could no longer provide. Harrow was a town full of secrets, and Remy knew he'd have to leave to find out the truth. The letter named Willow Creek, a location 3 hours north of where Bill and Katie Harper resided. He packed a little bag, took the keys to his old pickup truck, and drove into the rain, the wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. The road stretched out like a dark ribbon, and with each mile, the weight of the unknown increased. What would he say to these individuals? How do you enter into someone's life and inform them that you might be their son? Willow Creek presented a dramatic contrast to Harrow. Its streets were lined with neat residences, their lawns maintained, and their windows bright with warmth. The Harper's address directed Remy to a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door, the type of home that appeared to have hosted a lifetime of family dinners and holiday rituals. He sat in his truck for an hour, watching the house, his heart racing. A man went onto the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a tired expression. Remy acquired the name Bill Harper. A woman followed, her auburn hair reflecting the porch light. Katie. They moved with the ease of a long-term marriage, enjoying a peaceful moment before withdrawing inside. Remy's throat clenched. These were people who could have been his parents. He knocked on the door before he lost his composure. Katie responded, her grin friendly yet guarded. "Could I help you?" she inquired, her gaze searching his old jacket and dirty boots. "I'm Remy," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. "I received a letter." Katie's face became pale as she read the words, "I might be your son." She grasped the doorframe with white knuckles. "Bill," she said, her voice shaking. Bill appeared, his countenance changing from curiosity to worry as Katie repeated Remy's statements. They invited him inside, but their gestures were tight, as if they were preparing for a storm. The living area was cozy, full with framed photos and knitted blankets. Remy's gaze fell on a picture above the fireplace, a young man with Katie's auburn hair and Bill's strong jaw, beaming cheerfully in a graduation cap. Will, Remy reasoned, was the name on the letter. The boy who had grown up in his place. "Tell us about this letter," Bill asked, his voice firm but tinged with uneasiness. Remy passed it over, watching as they read it together, their expressions reflecting shock and bewilderment. Katie brought her palm to her mouth, and Bill's jaw stiffened. "This can't be true," Katie muttered. "It's impossible." However, the letter's specifics were too specific to disregard. It described the Willow Creek Hospital and Will's birth date of March 15, 2003, which was the same day Remy was born. It referred to Ellen by name, alleging she worked as a nurse's assistant and had access to the nursery. The letter said she had switched the babies out of desperation, but did not explain why. "We need to know," Remy murmured, his voice barely audible. "I need to know if I'm your son." Bill and Katie exchanged glances, a wordless dialogue unfolding between them. "We'll do a DNA test," Bill finally offered. "But we need to talk to Will first." Will Harper, 22, was a recent college graduate working as a teacher's assistant in a nearby city. When Bill called, he decided to come home right away, detecting the desperation in his father's voice. He arrived the next morning, infusing the place with nervous energy. Will was everything Remy wasn't: polished, confident, and at ease in the Harper's environment. He shook Remy's hand, his grip solid, yet his gaze was cautious. "What is going on?" Will inquired, his gaze shifting between his parents and the visitor in their living room. Katie explained, her voice breaking as she described the letter's assertions. Will listened in quiet, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he turned to Remy. Do you think you are their real son? And I'm what? Is this a mistake? I don't know, Remy admitted honestly. I just want the truth. The DNA test was scheduled through a private facility, and the results were expected within 1 week. In the meantime, Remy stayed in Willow Creek, renting a room at a low-cost motel. He spent his days traversing the town, plagued by the life he could have led. The Harper's house, with its warmth and security, was a world away from his childhood trailer, where winters meant layering blankets to remain warm and summers meant roasting in a metal box. He pondered what type of man he might have become if he had grown up here, with parents who could afford to send him to college and celebrated his birthdays with more than a store-bought cupcake. Meanwhile, the Harpers were unraveling. Katie couldn't sleep, her thoughts racing with recollections of the hospital and the murky hours following Will's birth. She had been so fatigued and overwhelmed that she had not noticed anything strange. But now she replayed every event, looking for hints she may have overlooked. Bill was quieter and more introverted, but Katie could hear him pacing the house at night, muttering questions to no one. Will, too, was struggling. He had always been the golden child, carrying his parents' hopes. The thought that he might not be there scared him to the core. He avoided Remy, unable to confront the guy who could take his position. The DNA results arrived on a gray morning in a sealed envelope. The Harpers invited Remy to their home, and they sat around the kitchen table, the envelope undisturbed between them. Katie's hands trembled as she opened it, her gaze searching the pages. Her breath caught as she handed it to Bill. His face dropped as he read aloud that Remy was their biological son. Will wasn't. Silence blanketed the room, heavy and stifling. Will stood abruptly, scraping his chair against the floor. Is that it? He exclaimed, his voice harsh. I am not yours. After 22 years, am I still just someone else's kid? Will, you're our son, Katie murmured, grabbing for him, but he backed away. No, I'm not, he said abruptly. He is. He motioned to Remy, who sat still, his heart hammering. Will went out and slammed the door behind him. Remy wanted to say something to relieve the pain in the room, but words eluded him. He felt like an intruder, a robber who had taken something valuable without intending to. I didn't want this, he admitted finally. I just wanted to know who I was. Katie's eyes were red, but she reached across the table and rested her palm on his. You're our son, she stated, her voice breaking. But so is Will. We reared him. We love him. Bill nodded, his gaze remote. We need time, he explained. It changes everything. Remy returned to his motel, his mind tangled with emotions. He was the Harper son, but what did it imply? He couldn't forget the years he'd spent with Ellen, the woman who had raised him and loved him, even if she had lied. He thought of her and wondered why she had done it. Had she been desperate for a child? Had she known the Harpers and envied their lifestyle? The letter provided no answers, and Ellen departed, carrying her secrets with her. Remy and the Harpers spent the following few weeks adjusting to their new reality. Katie invited him to supper, her attempts to connect hesitant but real. Bill was more subdued, his anguish over Will's absence evident. Will, meantime, had returned to the city and refused to answer his parents' calls. Remy felt the weight of his absence, knowing he was the cause, albeit unwittingly. Remy discovered a box of old photos in the motel's storage room one evening, left by a previous guest. Among them was a photo of a young woman carrying a baby, her face exhausted but radiant. It wasn't Ellen, but it may have been. He reflected on the life she'd given him, flawed as it was, and the one he'd never had with the Harpers. Both were authentic, both were his, but none felt like home. He resolved to search down Will, going to the city and meeting him at the school where he worked. Will was marking papers in an empty classroom, his expression somber. What do you want? He inquired, his tone harsh. I don't know, Remy acknowledged. I didn't mean to take anything from you. I'm trying to figure out where I fit. Will's eyes softened briefly. You didn't take anything, he said. It was taken from both of us. They spoke for hours, two strangers united by a common sorrow. Will discussed his childhood, the pressure to be the perfect kid, and the love he had never questioned until now. Remy related his own story of loneliness, growing up with Ellen's silences, and feeling out of place. They weren't friends yet, but there was an understanding between them, an acknowledgement of the anguish they both felt. Remy returned to Willow Creek, but did not stay long. The Harpers wanted him in their lives, but he could see the anguish in their eyes as they rushed to the vacant chair where Will once sat. He opted to leave, not because he didn't want to know them, but because he needed to discover himself first. He sent them a note, pledging to stay in touch, and drove back to Harrow, the only place he knew. The farmhouse was still there, with its roof leaking more than before. Remy sat at the kitchen table, where he had read the letter that altered everything. He thought of Ellen, Bill, Katie, and Will. He reflected on the life he'd lost and the one he'd lived. The rain fell outside, softer now, and Remy knew that the truth had not set him free, but had simply raised more questions. But perhaps that was sufficient. Perhaps knowing was its own form of home, even if it hurt. Bill Spencer stepped out onto Spencer Publications' patio, the golden light piercing through the glass skyscrapers like blades. He used to adore this hour, the way the city shone like molten metal and made him feel invincible. But tonight, the view just reminded him of what had slipped through his fingers. Love, trust, and time. He had power, yeah, but lately it felt like smoke. Luna had altered that, or made him believe she had. He remembered the way she smiled the first time she walked into his office, soft, unsure, yet disarming. She told him she appreciated his heritage and wanted to learn from him. And he, the guy who created his empire by never being duped, welcomed her in without hesitation. That was his first error. When he confronted her earlier that evening, he was not motivated by wrath. It was something worse, disappointment. You played me, Luna, he whispered quietly, his voice more dangerously calm than angry. You walked into my life with stories that didn't add up, a name that barely checked out, and I ignored it because I wanted to believe you were real. She'd stood still in his office, eyes streaming with tears she hadn't tried to hide. I didn't lie about everything, she said softly. Just enough, he replied. Luna had no defenses. The truth about her past, her mother's debts, her desperate decisions, and why she had faked someone else's credentials to acquire her job, was a stain she couldn't remove. She wanted to tell him that she didn't mean to fall for him, that she didn't intend to care, but Bill didn't want confessions. He wanted the truth, free of emotion, and she didn't know how to offer it to him without breaking totally. Get out, he said finally. Hours later, Bill stood staring at the horizon, convincing himself that he didn't care. But he did. He cared in the quiet, agonizing way that only a man who had fallen in love too late could. Across town, Hope Logan sat at her drafting table, surrounded by sketches and unfinished projects. The pencil in her fingers trembled as she attempted to concentrate, but her thoughts kept returning to Liam. No matter how many times she told herself they were over, his voice lingered in her thoughts, and his name remained on her breath like an unbreakable habit. She expected their final goodbye to set her free, but it only left her hollow. Brooke had paid her a visit earlier that day, playing matchmaking as she often does. Sweetheart, Brooke had gently stated, you and Liam belong together. I understand you're hurting, but love like that doesn't go away. Hope smiled faintly, too tired to fight. Brooke always meant well, but Hope couldn't keep lying. The wounds between her and Liam were old scars that had reopened and were bleeding in the same locations. She sat alone in the quiet cabin, the wind outside ringing like a heartbeat. She could still hear Liam's final words before he left that morning. Maybe we just keep trying to fix something that's already gone. The reality stung more than any betrayal. At the same time, Liam Spencer was sitting in his car outside the Forrester estate, staring at the driveway he used to know so well. He'd told himself he was finished, that he'd let Hope go, but a part of him kept coming back, like a tide attracted to the same coast. He wasn't sure if he was waiting for a sign, forgiveness, or simply the courage to leave for good. Wyatt called him earlier, concerned about their father. "Something's wrong with Dad," Wyatt remarked. "He is pushing everyone away again. It's like old Bill's back, the one who hides everything behind that damn tower." Liam moaned. "Yeah, maybe that's what happens when people allow love in. It makes you weak." But Liam knew that wasn't true. Weakness wasn't love, but fear. The same dread that had kept him bouncing between Hope and Steffi, scared to take one road because he didn't want to lose both. And now he's lost both. In the dimly lit Spencer home, Bill poured himself another drink he didn't desire. The ice clinked against the glass, sharp and hollow. He thought about Katie, who had always seen through his armor. She warned him about Luna not out of jealousy, but because she cared. "You're not good at being vulnerable," she'd told him before. "You mistake love for loyalty, and when people disappoint you, you burn the whole bridge instead of crossing it." He despised how accurate she had been. When the doorbell rang, he initially remained motionless. But when it rang again, he sighed and opened it, only to see Luna standing there, soaking from the unexpected downpour. "What are you doing here?" he asked. She shivered, her voice scarcely rising beyond a whisper. "I couldn't leave it that way. I needed you to know everything." "Luna, no," she said. "You deserve the truth. My name, my history, it's all true. But I left something out. My mother got in difficulty with individuals who do not forgive quickly. I took the job at Spencer to pay them back and make things right. I didn't intend to fall for you, but I did. I fell, panicked, and lied because I assumed if you heard the real story you'd go." Bill's jaw clenched. "You should have trusted me." "I know," she answered. And now it's too late. He wanted to trust her. Every word she spoke sounded desperate, not deceitful. But trust, once broken, never heals completely. He looked at her, his heart warring his pride, and for once, the guy known for making rash decisions paused. "Go home, Luna," he replied quietly, "before this gets any harder than it already is." Her eyes welled up with tears, but she nodded. When she turned to leave, something inside him screamed to stop her, to draw her back, to forgive. But he did not. The door closed quietly behind her, echoing around the empty house like a verdict. Hope came at Forrester Creations early the next morning, ready to get her work done. Ridge gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your mother told me you've been distant," he replied. "Are you okay?" She feigned a smile. "I am fine." Ridge saw the truth, however. Everybody did. Hope was still clutching onto something she couldn't change. And though he didn't say it, he worried she was becoming more like Brooke than she knew, chasing love that was always just out of reach. That evening, Hope decided to take a walk along the cliffs near Malibu, where she and Liam had once fantasized about their future. That night, the waves were wild, beating against the cliffs as if they were also angry. She thought about Luna. She'd heard rumors about what happened to Bill, and how Luna had vanished from Spencer Publications overnight. It made Hope's heart ache, not because she knew Luna well, but because she recognized the same pattern in her, loving someone who couldn't reciprocate in the same way. When she turned to leave, she noticed Liam standing a few feet away, his hair windswept and his countenance enigmatic. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Guess I couldn't stay away," he said. They stood silently, with the sound of the waves filling the gap between them. Finally, Hope spoke. "You were correct, you know. We keep attempting to repair something that is already broken." "Perhaps," he murmured gently. "Or maybe we just never learned how to let go." Hope looked at him, really looked, and knew that love was no longer enough. "I wish we could go back," she muttered. Liam nodded. "Me too." Neither of them moved closer. That night, Bill received a call that would change everything. Wyatt's voice sounded strained and barely steady. "Dad, this is Luna. There was an accident on the PCH. They reported her car lost control in the rain." Bill stopped breathing for a moment. The word struck him as a physical blow. "Is she? They're still trying to revive her," Wyatt explained quietly. Bill couldn't recall driving to the hospital, the rain beating on the windshield, or the sound of his tires skidding to a halt. He only remembered the sterile air of the emergency room and the bright lights, which made everything seem surreal. When the doctor finally approached, one look said it all. Luna was gone. He stood there in stunned quiet, the world around him fading to static. All the barricades he'd created, all the pride he'd held onto, were meaningless now. The last words he shouted to her, cold, decisive, and unforgiving, repeated in his head until they broke him. Later, when the hospital hallway was empty and the city was silent, Bill sat alone in the waiting room, his hands quivering. Katie arrived, her eyes red, but she did not speak. She simply sat near him, and for once, he did not push her away. "Have you ever grown tired of losing people?" he whispered. Katie glanced at him with sadness. "You do not lose people, Bill. You just don't hang on when you should." He looked at her, his eyes watering, and said nothing. Because she was correct. Days became weeks, and the world carried on. Luna's death became yet another rumor in the city's never-ending gossip cycle. Hope and Liam grew apart, their final goodbyes unspoken but understood. Brooks ceased attempting to play matchmaker, at least for a while. And Bill Spencer, who used to rule every room he stepped into, became quieter, slower, and haunted. He'd occasionally drive along the Pacific Coast Highway at night, stopping at the location where Luna's car had gone off the road. He'd sit there for hours, listening to the waves smash, which she must have heard in her final moments. He once muttered, "I'm sorry," into the wind. Only the water hurt him. Hope sat under the city lights, drawing a new design, a broken heart made of glass, cracked but not destroyed. Because, even in sadness, she realized something her mother never did. Love does not always end in triumph. Sometimes it ends quietly, in the gaps between what has been said and what will never be.